Hello, everybody. This week we are talking about spiritual identity development. And one of the things that'll be helpful if you go along with a PowerPoint presentation that I've provided to you. So I suggest you open that up and follow along with me as I go through this. And so on slide 2, why would we be talking about spiritual identity development? Why is this even relevant? Well, right around the late 1990s, in student affairs, the student development field got very interested in spiritual identity development. And before then, if you even mentioned the word spiritual, religion, anything else, they kind of considered it off limits. But then all of a sudden, there was sort of this explosion of interest in the spiritual development of college students. And the quote here by Love and Talbot helps to crystallize how things were being thought of in the late 90s. And so what they said was that student affairs' failure to engage in discussions of spirituality and spiritual development may contribute not only to foreclosure on matters of spirituality, but also to a general narrowness of perspective and an inability or willingness to think critically, explore value-related issues, and question authorities. So they saw it as something that was a huge hole in the concept of college student development and how student development professionals were working with college students. So one important thing to realize is that when most people in the ACPA, NASPA, those sorts of organizations talk about spiritual, they tend to think of it more in a secular spiritual way, like experiencing the transcendent. So your faith-based organizations like ACSD or others are going to look at the topic of spirituality and are going to conceptualize it much differently. So it's important to at least understand that there are different organizations and different types of institutions out there who will have very different views of what is spirituality, what is religiosity, what does it mean to be spiritual, what does it mean to be religious. So finding definitions of any of these things is troublesome because it comes out of different schools of thought. And so we just have to recognize there's tremendous diversity in how these issues are looked at. If you do, though, look at page 3, in some of the secular literature, spirituality is most often defined as something like an openness to the transcendent or the sacred. Other common words are subjective meaning, authenticity, those sorts of things. So it's a very broad term. If you look at some religious groups, for example, those who follow the Bible, when they often look and study biblical text, they'll see the word spiritual, and what it means is spiritually mature in their Christian faith. So again, and there are lots of other religious groups who are going to conceptualize spiritual in a very different way. That's just one example. But just know that there are different definitions, as I said. Now, religion, in the secular literature, it's an institutional construct, systems, doctrines, social processes, adhering to a sense of particular moral beliefs. It tends to involve systems and institutions. Now, that, again, is from a secular perspective. There actually is tremendous disagreement, I think, within the sacred community over what is religion. And if you look at some religious leaders over time, many of them decried religious people in the sense of thinking that their adherence to doctrine could save them. So lots of different opinions on just the subject of what religiosity or religion means. So that's just one definition there I gave you. On page 4, a different construct of faith, different from religion. The two most common authors in the secular study of spirituality, religiosity, faith, those sorts of things, and particularly in this case, faith development, are Parks and Fowler. Truth be told, I'm not a huge fan of either theory. I think sometimes they're either esoteric or a little over complex. But it is important to know them, I think, so that you're familiar with the types of theories out there that are commonly referenced when it comes to spiritual identity development. So with Parks, she defined faith as a dynamic universal construct that describes how human beings make meaning of their lives in a broad, comprehensive sense. So notice the term meaning making there is both in faith development, it's also in cognitive development. So there's an overlap there. Fowler defined faith as a universal construct encompassing how humans make meaning of the world. There we go again, making meaning. And shape our lives in relation to more or less comprehensive convictions or assumptions about reality. Fowler was a Harvard professor, and he, if you read his material, from my perspective, and this is just one person, I think he wrote a lot for other Harvard professors and not necessarily for other folks to understand well. I find his writings to be very thick and difficult to get through, to be honest, and I'm not sure it's even worth it. I think there are other theories that we can look at, but lots of people do think a lot of him and use him, so important to know. So if you look at a couple other authors, Love, Parks, for example, they tend to look at faith as being closer to the concept of spirituality than it is to religion. Although the term is often used as a substitute for religion. So we have religion, faith, spirituality, all those different words flowing around. My recommendation is that when you use any of those words, you make sure you let people know how do you operationally define those words so we can have mutual understanding of where each other are coming from. Now, on slide 5, I noticed some general trends that have happened in recent decades with students, how they're changing. A lot of good research shows that students are becoming more spiritual, as they themselves define spiritual, but less engaged in religious activities. So they may say that they are a more spiritual person, or the average student would say they're more spiritual and they're pretty deep, have a depth of spirituality. But they're not going to go to temple or a mosque or a church or those sorts of things, and they'll sort of decry that as organized religion. So that's a bit of a trend that we're seeing. And they also, today, students believe that non-religious people can live just as morally as religious believers, so they don't necessarily see as much of a moral component to their religious beliefs, if they have any. And they also strongly reject the notion that there's a God and that he will, well, they don't reject the notion that there's a God. Most of them believe in a God. But they reject the notion that God will punish those who don't believe in him. So they don't necessarily, your average student doesn't believe in the perception that there's one God, one true God, that they believe that, well, there are many ways to God, or there are many gods and you can choose from one of them. So that's a bit about today's college students. Now, on slide 6, what you'll see is that 4/5 of students are interested in the topic of spirituality. So again, this is a very keen interest among today's college students. 3/4 say they're searching for meaning and purpose. 3/4 discuss the meaning of life with friends. Half seek opportunities for spiritual growth. So if anyone tries to say spiritual matters aren't important to college students, they haven't read the data. And because indeed spiritual matters are important to today's college students. Now on slide 7, what you'll see is that 4/5 of our college students have attended religious services during the last year. So they're going somewhere at some point. Now that could be on 1 or 2 religious holidays to please their family. It could be that they're going 2 or 3 times a week. It's a very blunt instrument when it comes to measuring religious belief, but important to know that about 80% of students at some point in the year are entering a house of worship or something of the sort. Now, 4 in 10, about 40%, consider it as either essential or very essential to follow religious teachings in their everyday lives. So that would be a deeper level of commitment to a particular religion and a wanting to follow the beliefs of that religion. Now, there are many of them that they may follow, but about 4 in 10 of today's college students are at least attempting, or think it's important to attempt, to match their beliefs and the beliefs of their religious group. Now, one salient issue I raise on page 8, slide 8, to consider is about a quarter of the students who go to counseling centers on college campuses report either moderate or extreme spiritual or religious distress. So what does that mean? Okay, so we have, let's say, if 100 students, and this is totally made up, but there are 100 students who go to a particular counseling center in a semester. 25 of them, when they go in and they say, why are you, someone says, why are you here? They'll report some kind of distress spiritually or religiously, which is really interesting. That's a lot higher than I would expect. I would expect people who have spiritual or religious distress who would go seek a pastor, an imam, a rabbi, someone of that sort. But no, they're often going to counselors on campus. These folks tend to report that they're confused about their values, they're troubled with their peer relationships, they have sexual issues that are troubling them, they're worried over being punished for sin. So lots of different things can lead students into a counseling center, and many of those involve spiritual or religious matters. Now, slide 9, we can talk about the impact of spiritual development. One of the lines of research out there has shown that people with stronger spiritual beliefs engage in fewer high-risk behaviors and things that could be unhealthy, things that could be dangerous, things that could cause someone harm or someone else harm. They're also more confident in their career decisions. So people more spiritual tend to have a stronger sense of, this is the career that I want to go into. They might even call it a calling. And in fact, those with stronger spiritual beliefs had a higher high school GPA. Where that comes from, not exactly sure, but just reporting the data. Students with lower levels of spiritual development, they tend to want a great deal of affirmation from others. Their goal is they want others to recognize them. They party a lot more. They spend a lot more time on the internet. And they're also, oddly enough, more likely to be Buddhist. Now, that's not saying all students with low spiritual development scores are Buddhist, but that is one of the things that pops up when you look at students who have lower levels of spiritual development that's associated with Buddhism. Just the messenger here. Gender differences and similarities on slide 10. This probably isn't a big surprise to you, but more women than men believe in God. And that's something that's certainly been a trend for many years, and the research of the day tends to confirm that. Women also, naturally, if they believe, more likely to believe in God, they also have higher levels of religiosity than men, a deeper commitment to their particular faith, religion, or spiritual point of view. Women also tend to differ significantly from men in the extent to which they report taking religious advice into account in times of significant personal crisis, and in the degree to which religion provides for feelings of security or comfort. So essentially, women are much more likely to seek out and to follow religious advice when they are facing an important decision. And then finally, men and women are actually the same in terms of how they say their particular religion influences their daily life and their belief as to whether their soul continues after death. So many differences, but there actually are some similarities among college students. Now, if you look at page 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, of the PowerPoint slides that I'm providing, there are very interesting questions there, I think, that you might be able to use with college students who you engage with if you're wanting to raise if you're wanting to raise spiritual questions, whether that be secular or whether that be religious in nature. And a lot of that may depend upon your role in the institution where you work and what you feel your calling is. But Carney Strange, I think, came up with some really interesting questions for people to ponder. And so if you're looking to just engage with students and ask them about their spiritual beliefs and get into spiritual matters, a lot of these questions, I think, are really well put and can lead to some very valuable discussion. So sometimes we talk about theory and there's really not a direct application, but this is a direct application. I hope you'll consider it. So Thank you very much, and I hope you spend time learning about spiritual development theory this week, and we'll see you again soon.